G'day legends, I hope you're all fantastic. It is finally here, the TC Electronic 2290P pedal-based recreation of their iconic 2290 rack delay. If you're interested in checking out an in-depth video with the original rack, I have one up on my channel that I'll link at the end of the description. But essentially this takes the similar format of the rack. You've got buttons, you've got a very clean delay line with the ability to have several different modulation destinations and sources. This adds some new features like rhythmic subdivisions, a deep modulation mode, there's stereo ins and outs, as well as MIDI on the pedal and the ability to hook up an expression switch. You can store presets on there and cycle through them with the built-in preset buttons. Of course, because it's a pedal, there's a tap tempo switch, which the original rack did not have. So let's maybe just start out with a few factory presets in here. Then we'll go through how you actually dial this in, and I'll talk you through the overall workflow on it, because it's still pretty unique for a rack delay, but it's especially unique for the way it is laid out now as a pedal. Let's get going. I really have to take my non-existent hat off to the sound designers and the engineers here. Not only have they recreated the overall workflow of the unit with what some would consider some improvements. I mean, this knob here is labeled keyboard. On the real unit, you have a keyboard on there so you can pump numbers straight into the unit. I thought that was the dumbest thing I have ever seen on a pedal before, but now I just don't read keyboard. I use that knob on there, and it is a little bit easier to dial some things in. The presets are really, really well curated, and I love that they have kind of recognized the legacy of the 2290 as being one of the best chorus and flanger units of all time as well. Some of those chorus tones, the flanger tones, sort of the automatic double tracking, short slapback sounds in there are phenomenal on there. So I'm really, really impressed. And of course, you've got that lush TC2290 signature sound in there. I will put some clips up right at the end of the video comparing this to the rack. I'll go straight away and say it doesn't sound exactly like the rack unit that I have. The rack unit that I have is nearly 40 years old, and like kind of old crusty technology, it kind of has its quirks on there. But this isn't just 2290 cosplay on here. It really does feel similar to using the rack unit, and the sounds are phenomenal. I think they stand on their own, and that's a super unique layout to have on a pedal. So that was a bunch of presets. I want to just briefly go over the controls, and by briefly, I mean hopefully less than 10 minutes on here. So the way this is laid out and how stuff works on here. So you can see right in the middle, you've got your core delay time over here. So if you press the delay button here, you can then adjust that with the keyboard knob on here. So you can do that. You can add modulation to the delay line by pressing this button. One extra thing that they've got on here is a new deep mode for the modulation, so you can get super wobbly on there. Furthermore, you have a subdivision button on here, and straight away there's a bug on here. When you go into the subdivisions and you go to, what is it? I want to turn them to eighth notes on here. I press it again to get dotted eighth notes. That doesn't give you the correct dotted eighth note subdivision. You have to go to an eighth note triplet. If you want your classic dotted eighth notes on there, that should be something they're able to patch fairly easily with a firmware update. There is a USB-C jack on the back, and there is an editor to arrange your presets on there. I would like to see an editor that gives you all of the controls so you can steer this from a computer. That would be a great update. So that's kind of the actual delay line section in there. Now, if you turn all the modulation off on here, one thing that made the 2290 very unique was one of the stereo outputs, was a mono-in stereo output delay, was phase reversed with the main signal. So you get this psychoacoustic effect of the delay sounding super, super wide. So let's do this. Let's go to the subdivisions. I've got an eighth note triplet. I can tap the tempo in over here. Let's go for something in the sort of 130 zone, maybe a little bit faster over there. 133 will do. If I want to set the amount of feedback, I press the feedback button over here. And if you're going for chorus or flanger tones, you can hit the inverse switch over here. What that will do is that will flip the phase of the feedback. So if you want a flanger with positive or negative feedback, you can do that in there. Furthermore, if you hit select, you can set the filtering in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the, what do I want to do? I want to set the filters over here wide open. So the real 2290 was kind of renowned for being very, very hi-fi. If I hit select on the low, I can take it right down. So this is going to give me basically a full range delay in there. You can see the overall feedback is at 50 on there. It's an interface that takes some getting used to on there. And I basically dialed in my favorite sounds on the rack, and I rarely touch them that much. So it's been nice revisiting them on this. If you want to set the delay level over here, you can do it as so. So you set the delay level and the direct level. They both go up to 99. So if you have them both at 99, you're going to get equally loud delays and dry signal on there. There's a modulation section over here, and you kind of set the modulation destination and sources over there. But for now, we just have a nice big clear delay. Let's have a listen to what it sounds like. Make sure you're listening in stereo. If you're summing to mono somewhere, you're actually not going to hear any delay because of that phase reverse thing. Next up, you can add some modulation, and you can set modulation to a variety of sources. You've got traditional delay line modulation in here. So if you want to set that up, you come over here and you select the thing you want to modulate, so the modulation source. You've got the delay, you've got the delay panning, and you've got dynamic, so you can have a ducked delay in here. This was something that the 2290 was renowned for, and it's great if you're playing big dirty leads and you want your delays to be turned down while you're playing and then turn up in the gaps in your playing. So I've set the destination as delay. If I want my delays to be modulated, I need to press this button over here, and then I can set the speed and the depth over here. So I don't know why, 0.7 hertz is my favorite modulation rate on delays, and then we can adjust the amount of depth on there. So let's hear it first with no modulation, then the stock modulation like you'd hear on the rack, then the new deep mode. I like that you have the option to get that deeper than the original. That is one thing that modern technology does afford. It can go beyond the limitations of these classic units. And I would argue that the limitations forced the original designers to make really creative choices, which ended up in some pretty iconic sounds and workflows. Taking those choices and then expanding on them is only going to be a good thing for the end user. So the deep modulation is really cool. The panning and the ducking is even cooler on this unit. So of course you do have multiple waveforms and sources for the modulation. You can see in there you've got a sine wave as kind of the standard choice on there. Then you've got random, envelope, and trigger. Let's do this. Let's set up some ducking. So before we do some ducking, let's do some panning. This one's straightforward. We'll go to pan. I'm just going to leave it as a sine wave shape on here. I can set the speed and the depth. I'll turn the depth, or just leave it at 99, so it's giving me the full stereo spectrum on there. Now I'm going to have a nice slow panning delay. What I need to do though is I need to press the pan mod. So I turn the panning on, and then I'm going to set it to the delay. I can actually have delay, direct panning, or both of them. We'll hear the delay to start with. Then I'll do both because that gives quite a cool trippy sound. Next up, let's set up the ducker in here. So you can select envelope or trigger on here. Again, if you want the ducker to be on, you've got to turn it on by pressing the relevant mod button under DIN for dynamic. Or maybe it's for dinosaur and they've just spelt it in an interesting way. Let's have a listen to what this does now. So there's a crash course in the basics of how the 2290 works. You can do a whole bunch of things with those. If you wanted to just set this up as a chorus or flanger, of course, we could go to the delay section and turn it right down over here. So if I take it down somewhere in the like 15 to 20 millisecond range over there, I'm going to turn the kind of panning and dynamics off. I'm going to leave the main delay modulation on there. I'll set the direct signal and the dry signal to be the same level on there. And if I turn the feedback all the way down to 0, I'm going to have a nice chorus. If I go to like 3 millisecond sort of range in there, I can get a flanger and then add some feedback to it. You could set up the dynamics section to work as a compressor. You could have the delay level in there be modulated by a sine wave and get a tremolo style delay on there. You could have a gated delay rather than a duck delay, where you set it up so that when you're playing, the delays are really, really loud, but when you stop, they get gated out on there. You've got panning, you could have a panning chorus, flanger, automatic double tracking. It's really, really nice having all of these modulation sources laid out. Probably the only other pedal on the market at the moment that has a similar sort of vibe would be the Free the Tone Future Factory. The core engine in there is a little bit different though. It kind of looks like a 2290. It diverges from it in a few key areas. Obviously, if you love the original 2290 rack, would I recommend this? It's a hell of a lot cheaper than buying a vintage 2290, and it's going to be a lot easier to find a replacement on there. A few little complaints that I have on here. I'm going to give you a comparison clip right at the end of this video, so I'll watch on past this. But the overall chassis, like if you kind of push it on here, it does bend a little bit. So stomping on that middle button does feel just like a little bit flimsy. And then the jacks that they've used on there, when you insert the cable, it kind of gets stuck, and then it has this really unsatisfying mechanical thud about it. It's not like plugging in a normal pedal jack where you get that, just eases in nice and smooth. This just kind of goes and goes ka-gunk. So they do detract from the overall experience a little bit. They do feel a little bit cheap, in my opinion. But aside from that, it's laid out really, really well. And, you have what I think is a great idea. You have this like Cyclops Scott Summers visor over here. Let me put that on, to protect your audience from the power of the 2290. A pedal shipping with this is such a great idea, in my opinion, because you do not want to stomp on those buttons accidentally when you're using the pedals. So overall, I think TC did a very, very good job capturing the sound and the overall vibe of the original 2290 on here. If you're looking for a 2290 in a delay, I don't think you really have to look any further. Evaluating it as just a standalone delay pedal, look, it's got its quirks on here. This isn't going to be one of those kind of modern super delays that has buttons called analog or digital on there. You need to know how to work these things. You could set the filters in this really, really bandwidth limited and get an analog style delay. Again, you can do chorus and flanger and panning delays. So there are a bunch of modes. They're just not labeled as modes. I think you could start with the presets and just kind of go from there. But I am pretty impressed. I was a little bit skeptical. I thought this might just be the, flashback 2290 algorithm stuck in a pedal. Again, I thought it was going to be 2290 cosplay. Actually using it, the sounds are super inspiring, and it does remind me a lot of the rack. Whether it sounds 90% like the rack, 95% like the rack, 100% like the rack, how important that is to you is going to vary, but I think if you wanted that vibe in a pedal, this more than scratches the itch, and it's not ridiculously priced, especially compared to other delay pedals out there. I would say if you like this kind of sound, but you don't need all that functionality, a few other pedals to look at. The Keeley Andy Timmons Halo does some great rack-style delays. Obviously, the Strymon Dig, I absolutely love the sound of that. The Source Audio Nemesis can get pretty close to this because you can phase reverse one side of the delay line in there. That's more like a modern super delay pedal with various modes. There's a bunch of others out there, but I really enjoyed this. Again, I went and bought this pedal, paid full price for it, no affiliation with TC. I feel like I spent my money reasonably well on here. I'd love to know your thoughts if you've grabbed one of these or if you own an original rack. If you like what I'm doing here, my Patreon and the music I make is linked in the video description. And now I'm just going to give you some basic sounds and compare the rack to the pedal. Enjoy. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you next time.